So the final little bits of information that you need to know about variables before you know it all are scope, namespaces, and events. So this isn't going to take us too long, maybe 10, 15 minutes to kind of go through this here. Let me just create an empty project, take a look at our project. And the first thing that we'll talk about is the concept of scope in a variable. So I am at the package level. I'm in the control flow tab. And when I go to the variables, what I'm seeing over here in this variables pane, let me just pick out the basics here, is the variables that are defined at this scope. So if I come over here and I take a look at the system package, the system variables, you see that they have a scope of package. Important, because what that means is that anywhere in the package, I'm able to use these variables. Okay, so scoping inside of SSIS is very similar to scoping in any kind of a structured programming language. If you define a variable in a function, you can't access that variable outside of the function. Similarly, if we go to the toolbox and we drag the data flow task on here, and we go into the data flow task and take a look at the variables, when we are looking, you can see that this scope is the data flow task scope. So if we now come over here and create a variable, it defaults to my df variable. You can see that it defaults to the data flow task scope, meaning that it is available to all tasks within this data flow task, but it cannot be called from other data flow tasks. So we come over here and go back to this, and let's call this Scott's DFT, data flow task here. When we come back, go into it, now you see that the scope has now changed, just so that no one was confused thinking that that variable would now be available for all data flow tasks. It would not. It's only these variables, and this one here is the user variable that we created. These are only available in this particular data flow task. Does it make sense? You have scoping. So for example, if we go out to control flow here and click on the package, notice that our scoping goes back to the package. There is no Scott's DF variable here. Okay? We have to actually go click on this. Now we are showing now the scoping, and we can see my DF variable being found here. But so let me ask you a question. If I drag a script task right here, and I try to access in the read-only variables my df variable, will it show up? I'm at the package level. No, it won't show up because that is not defined at this scope. Okay? I have to be inside the data flow task before I can access a package at that scope. Okay, so scoping goes, I'm trying to think of like an easy way to just quickly define this. So like you've got a package, and underneath the package you've got a task, a container. And so if I define a variable at the package level, then it can be used by the tasks and the containers. Okay? Any task within a container, any data movement within a task, all of those would be able to access the variables defined therein. And let me just do this. Underneath the container, remember, we can have tasks, and we could also have other containers inside that as well. So if I defined, and I'll use red, if I defined a variable at the task level, it would strictly and only be available inside that task or in that task. It would not be available to the calling package. It would not be available to things, other containers. However, if I define, let me run out of colors here. If I define a variable at the container scope, it's available to any tasks and containers and all sub-elements of those. It just kind of cascades down. if you will. Okay? But if I'm in, final example here, if I'm in this particular container and I define a variable, then that variable would not be available to the calling container. It's not available to the parent. Okay, this is actually a pretty standard scoping rule, probably not surprising to you. Okay, so you just have to watch what you're clicking on when you're defining your variables. Once you've defined your variable, what you can do, if you want to see, you can see your scoping here. If I click on over here, we can come to my df variable down here. Notice I can't change the scope. So what you end up doing if you messed up, you just simply end up deleting it at that scope. And when you create it, you can actually say I wanted it to be my df variable. And you can actually specify your scoping here. And I created it. I'm not able to do that. What? My df variable. And I can't. I thought there was a drop down. Just like mentally, I was thinking there was a drop down in here. So no, I guess I can't. Brain cramp right there. So just go to the outer scope and create it right there. My df variable. Okay? And now you have one at package scope. And I've deleted the one at Scott's DFT. Now I could actually have one in both locations because the scope would be different. So if I went down to Scott's DFT and let me take out the system variables and my df variable. Because the scope is different, I can have them with the same name. Okay? No problem doing that. However, it does get confusing from a script task. If you wanted to say, I want to use my df variable now, so you didn't want to actually prefix it, which one is it going to use? Right? You're going to actually get an error message at runtime because it's going to evaluate that and not necessarily, well, in this case, actually, that one's scoped down there, so the script task could only access this one. So that would actually be successful. So the scoping can leave you confused. Okay, let's just leave it at that. Now, the other part of this would be the idea of a namespace. So let me bring back in my system. And let's go to our column chooser. And I check the box for namespace. And you can see system versus user. I mean, that's every time you click this new box down here, it's creating user level variables. They are in the user namespace. Don't have to be. If you have some reason to, you could put them in the LIF, right? And now when you access them from within the script task, for an example, you'd be able to see that some are in the user namespace and others are in the LIF namespace. Doesn't mean anything, doesn't do anything. You just now need to prefix it with the proper namespace. The final little bit here is this last column. Do you want to raise an event when a variable's value changes? Okay, well this doesn't actually raise the event. This shows you the column that specifies whether it's true or false. And you can see the default setting is that an event is not raised. Take out those. Got a lot of those. Let's just make one called my df variable. Sorry. So all we have to do is change it, and we can actually have it create a change event. Now, you need to go to your event handlers, and you need to go to your event here, and you go to this event handler here, on variable value changed. So you need to choose on variable value changed, and you just click, it will create that event handler for us. Okay, now in our event handler, what we're going to do is just do a simple pop-up box. I'm not going to actually perform any actions. I just want it to, hey, did you know that the variable's value changed? So let's just use our old system Windows forms, message box dot show, which is stuff you'd never use in production level code, right? But it's great for development. Hey, something changed the value of the variable. And of course, yes, you could raise more information, but this is sufficient to give you the idea of what that actually does. So there's our systems.windows.forms.messagebox. Okay. And so in our control flow, let's change the value of the variable. I'll just grab a script task, throw it on here. Let's read write, so we need to lock this one. So we'll do the mydf variable, and let's just change the value of it here. Let's say, copy out of here, and just say equals 4, and just change mydf variable. Okay? Just so you can see, not much to that, right? So close out of here. As soon as the variable changes, because we had it raise that event, then it pops it up. Woo-hoo. Right? You would actually use that kind of stuff in the real world when you need to audit variable changes, or you are, particularly during debugging and development, you're unsure of what's causing something to change. You want to know, wait a minute, where is that change happening? In really, really big SSIS packages, man, it can get difficult to do that kind of debugging.